the spring of 2010, and I just settled into a small rental house on the edge of a quiet town in Oregon. The neighborhood was unremarkable rows of modest homes with tidy lawns, the kind of place where everyone waved but nobody lingered to live alone. A choice, a cherished after years of noisy roommates, the house, though old, had a certain charm with its creaky floors and wide front windows. But something unsettling happened just a few weeks after I moved in. Something I still can't fully shake. It started on a gray afternoon while I was working from home. My laptop chat on the kitchen table. It glanced out the front window and noticed a blues and parked across the street, maybe 3 houses down. It wasn't flashy, but its deep, almost unnatural shade of blue caught my eye. I didn't think much of it at first. People park on streets all the time. But when I stepped outside to grab a package from my porch, I saw a figure in the driver's seat, a man slouched low, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He wasn't looking at me, just staring straight ahead, his hands resting on the wheel-ish rugged. Assuming he was waiting for someone, and went back inside an hour later while washing dishes. I glanced out again. Dan was still there as I was. The man, his cap was tilted down, but now he seemed to be scribbling something in a notebook. His movements quick and deliberate, a prickle of unease through me. But it told myself I was being paranoid. Neighborhood have visitors, cars park, it's normal by dusk. Dan hadn't budged. He was in the living room flipping through channels when I noticed the man had rolled down his window. We was holding a small camera, its lens pointed directly at my house. My breath caught. Was she taking pictures? Video. I stepped back from the window, heart thudding, and watched from the shadows. His face was still hidden, but the camera's red recording light blinked like at an email volantai. A few minutes later he started the engine and drove off. Dan vanishing around the corner. I let out a shaky breath, hoping that was the end of it. It was wrong. 3 nights later, I was up late binge watching a sci-fi series in my bedroom. It was past midnight and the house was silent except for the hum of the TV. Then it echoed from the side door leading to the garage. I muted the TV, my pulses spiking. Another thud, louder, like someone slamming their weight against the door. My first thought was a break in. Lit off the bed, grabbing my phone, and crept toward the hallway, every nerve one get the side. Door rattled violently, the knob twisting back and forth. Whoever it was wasn't subtle. They wanted it. I scanned the room for a weapon, cursing myself for not hounding so much as a baseball bat. My eyes landed on a heavy flashlight by the nightstand. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He jed toward the garage, staying low, and peered through the small window beside the door in the dim glow of the porch light. Saw a man tall wearing a dark jacket and that same baseball cap. His face was turned away, but his movements were frantic, almost desperate. As she tugged at the door, the lock held, but the frame groaned under the pressure. His hood have called 911 right then, but panic scrambled my thoughts instead. I remembered a trick I'd seen online. I opened my phone, found a sound effects app I downloaded for a prank, and scrolled to a track labeled guard dog barking. I cranked the volume to max and hit play. The room filled with ferocious snarls and barks. Salute it vibrated. The walls, the rattling stopped. Instantly I peeked out the window and saw the man stumble back, his head whipping around, as if expecting a dog to lunge from the shadows. She bolted, disappearing around the side of the house, his sank to the floor, trembling, and finally dialed 911. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Their flashlights sweeping the yard, they found scuff marks on the side door and a faint dent where the man had leaned into it, but knew their evidence. It told them about the blues dant, the man with the camera, the way he'd watched my house. They took our port, promised to patrol the area, and left. They never found him. I'm certain it was the same man from the dant. The timing, the cap, the way he moved it all lined up. But what haunts me most isn't the attempted breaking. It's what I found the next morning, etched into the wooden frame of the side door, a crude jagged symbol like a knife with a slash through. It wasn't there before that night, and noon could have carved it without a knife. In time I painted over it, but sometimes late at night, I hear faint scratches outside, like something circling the house, testing for a way, and have installed cameras and deadbolts since then, but I still keep that flashlight by my bed. Just in case the figure in the fog. It was the autumn of 2015 when I moved my family to a quiet, sprawling suburb in the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. My wife, Clara, and our 5-year-old Ethan were thrilled to leave our cramped city apartment behind. The new house was a charming 2-story with a massive backyard, nearly 2 acres of untamed land dotted with towering pines and overgrown ferns. The neighborhood was strolling in from the nearby river most evenings, cloaking everything in an eerie, at the real haze. He'd always dreamed of a place like this, somewhere I could build a garden, maybe even a treehouse for Ethan. But the yard was a mess: patchy grass, tangled weeds, and a strange, uneven patch of earth near the back fence that looked like it had been dug up and hastily refilled. We'd been in the house for barely a week when I decided to tackle the yard. It was a chilly Saturday morning, the air thick with fog, and Clara was inside unpacking while Ethan played with his toys, armed with a rake, shovel, and a wheelbarrow. I set to work, pulling weeds and leveling the ground, the fog muffled sounds, making the world feel small and isolated, but I didn't mind, it was peaceful. Around noon, I realized I needed more tools and some fertilizer, so I hopped in my truck and drove to the local hardware store. The trip was uneventful, though I remember the cashier warning me about the fog getting worse later. "Get so thick you can't see your own hands," she'd said with a nervous laugh. When I returned, the fog had indeed thickened, curling around the house like a living thing. It parked in the driveway and headed to the backyard, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as I worked near the back fence. I noticed something odd, a faint rhythmic creaking like a gate swinging in the wind. I froze, listening. Our property was fenced, but the gate was on the opposite side of the house, and I hadn't touched it. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel peering through the fog. I could just make out the street in front of our house, where a battered old sedan was parked between our property and the neighbors. I hadn't seen it before. A figure emerged from the caravan, tall and gaunt, wearing a dark coat that seemed to blend into the mist. They stepped onto our property, standing just inside the fence line, his head tilted, as if watching me. The fog obscured his face, but I could feel his gaze, heavy and unyielding. I called out, "Hey, can I help you?" My voice sounded thin in the damp air. The man isn't responding. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step toward me. His movements, unnaturally smooth, almost gliding unease, prickled my skin. He'd mature immediate neighbors are tupled to the left and a young family across the street, and this man wasn't one of them. I set down my shovel and started walking toward him, intending to ask what he wanted, but as I approached, he turned sharply to his right and vanished into the fog, his silhouette swallowed by the mist. In my pace, reaching the spot where he'd been, but there was nothing, just the faint smell of damp earth and something metallic like old coins. Thinking he might have gone toward the front of the house, I jogged around the side, my heart thudding. The front yard was empty, the porch silent. I checked the door, locked. Thank God. I called Clara from the porch, asking if anyone had knocked or come inside. "No," she said, sounding confused. "Why, what's wrong?" I didn't want to alarm her, so I said it was nothing, and went back to the yard. The den was still parked on the street, its windows fogged over. I scanned the property, checking behind the pines and along the fence, but the man was gone. The creaking sound started again, fainter now, coming from the direction of that strange patch of earth near the back fence. He approached it cautiously, noticing fresh footprints in the mud, long, narrow, and deep, like someone had stood there for a long time. The dirt looked freshly disturbed. Then a chill ran through me, told myself it was just a neighbor cutting through, maybe someone lost in the fog, but the man's slow, deliberate movement stuck in my mind, shaking it off. I returned to work, pulling weeds and spreading fertilizer. Hours passed, and the fog grew denser, the world shrinking to a gray bubble around me. He kept glancing at these. Dan still parked, its presence gnawing at me. The sun began to set, casting an orange glow through the mist. I heard a loud guttural sound behind me, like a breath, but too deep to resonate. He spun around, and there he was, the man standing in the middle of the backyard, maybe 40 feet away. The fog parted just enough to reveal his face, pale, almost translucent, with eyes that were too large, too dark, like twin voids. She was smiling, but it wasn't a human smile. His lips stretched too wide, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted, gripping the shovel. The man didn't answer. His head tilted, and that horrible smile widened. I took a step toward him, anger overriding fear. But he moved fast, too fast, darting behind a cluster of pines. I ran after him, shouting for him to get off my property. But when I reached the tree, she was gone. The creaking sound echoed again, now accompanied by a faint rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I searched the area, calling out, but found nothing except more footprints, these ones leading toward that disturbed patch of earth. By now my nerves were shot. Went back to the house, locked the doors, and checked on Clara and Ethan. They were fine, oblivious to what had happened. I didn't tell Clara everything, just that I'd seen someone trespassing and was going to keep an eye out that night. I barely slept, my mind replaying the man's face, those eyes that smile at one point, his war. I heard the creaking again, coming from the backyard. But when I looked out the window, the fog was too thick to see anything. The next morning I woke to a nightmare. The backyard was ruined. The grass I'd leveled was torn up. The fertilizer scattered, and deep gouges marked the earth like something had clawed at it. Worst of all, that strain patch near the fence was now a gaping hole about 3 feet deep, with something glinting at the bottom. I grabbed a flashlight and peered in my stomach, churning. It was a small, rusted box, half buried in the dirt. It didn't touch. I couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I called the police, reporting the vandalism and the trespasser while waiting for them. It noticed. Dan was gone. The police found not race of the man or his care, and they dismissed the whole Askids messing around. They took report and left, but I wasn't satisfied. He bought security cameras that day and installed them around the property that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the box against my better judgment. I went out with a shovel and dug it up. It was locked, its surface etched with strange spiraling symbols that made my eyes hurt to look at. I hid it in the garage, telling myself I'd deal with it later than ever returned, but the strangeness didn't end. The cameras caught fleeting shapes in the fog, tall gaunt figures that vanished when I reviewed the footage. The creaking sound became a nightly occurrence, sometimes accompanied by whispers I couldn't quite make out, then started waking up screaming, saying, as Mealing Man watched him from the window. Clara wanted to move, but we couldn't afford it. They buried the box in the woods a mile away, hoping it would end things, but the whispers grew louder, and the fog seemed to follow us. Ven indoors last week. It found fresh footprints in the backyard leading to a new hole where the old one had been. Something was digging, searching. I don't know what's out there, but I know it's not human, and I know it's not done with us. The echoes in the void in the winter of 2020. It took a leap and moved into a modest apartment building in a forgotten corner of Chicago. The place was old, its brick facade weathered by decades of wind and snow, but the rent was cheap and I was desperate for a fresh start after a rough year. The building had a certain charm, creaky wooden floor, high ceilings and tall narrow windows that rattled in the wind. My unit was on the 5th floor at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The landlord warned me the place was a bit quirky, but I brushed it off. Quirky, I could handle it. It was the silence that got him first, the kind that felt like it was holding its breath. The weirdness started on my 3rd night. He was up late, unpacking boxes and streaming a show on my laptop when a sharp, deliberate knock showed from the front door. It was past midnight, and the sound was so loud it made me jump. I muted the laptop and sat still, waiting for another knock. Knocking, it crept to the door, my socks silent on the cold floor, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, its flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows. We opened the door a crack, just to be sure, but there was noon. The air felt heavy, like someone had just been there. But all was the faded wallpaper and the closed doors of my neighbor's apartments. It cocked it up to a prank, or maybe the building settling. But the next night it happened again. This time it was closer to 1 a.m. 3 hard knocks that seemed to vibrate through the door. He rushed to the peephole. Nothing. Even stepped into the hallway. My phone's flashlight cut, but it was deserted. The knocks continued every night, never at the same time, always loud and insistent, like someone was demanding. I opened the door by the 5th night. I was sleeping with a baseball bat by bed, my nerves frayed. I hadn't met any neighbors yet, and the building felt eerily empty, though I'd seen signs of life: trash bags by doors, the hum of a TV through a wall. On the 6th night, something new happened. He was laying in bed, the room dark except for the faint glow of streetlights seeping through the blinds, when a low rhythmic thumping started. It wasn't from the front door this time. It was coming from the wall behind my bed, the one shared with the apartment next door. The sound was slow and deliberate, like someone was tapping their knuckles against the plaster, testing it. It froze, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The thumping started again, louder, closer. As if whoever it was had pressed themselves right against the wall. I bolted upright, flicked on the lamp, and stared at the blank wall, half expecting something to burst through. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I left for my shift at the coffee shop, my eyes burning from exhaustion. As I passed the apartment next door, Unit 5B, I noticed its door was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness peeked through the gap, and as where I heard a faint rustling like fabric dragging across the floor. Hesitated, tempted to push the door open, but the thought of what I might find stopped me cold. I hurried to the stairs, glancing back to see the door still cracked, unmoving. When I got home that evening, the door was closed, but there was a faint scratch mark on the frame, fresh and jagged, like someone had dragged a nail across it, desperate for answers. I knocked on the door of 5 at the unit across the hall. An older man answered, his face lined and tired. His name was Harold, and he'd lived in the building for 15 years. Asked if he knew who lived in 5B. He frowned, shaking his head. Nobody's been in that unit for a month. She said it's been empty since the last tenant left. This voice trailed off, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. It told him about the knocking, the thumping, the open door. He looked uneasy, but said he hadn't heard anything unusual. Old buildings make noise, as she muttered, shutting the door before I could ask more. That night, the knocking on my front door was louder, more frantic, like someone was pounding with both fists. I didn't bother checking the peephole. I knew noon would be there, but as I stood in the living room clutching my bat, I heard something else, a faint rasping whisper from the other side of the wall. too soft to make out words, but unmistakably humanitros, and fell like someone muttering to themselves, and then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse, heavy and oppressive like the air. Before a storm, he reported everything to the landlord. The next day he was dismissive, saying it was probably kids messing around or pipes in the walls, but a promise to check the cameras in the hallway. The knocking stopped for 2 nights, and I dared to hope it was over. Then on the 3rd night, I woke to a new sound, not knocking, but scratching, slow and deliberate, coming from inside the wall behind my bed. It was rhythmic, like claws scraping through plaster, and it grew louder, closer, until I could hear faint flakes of debris hitting the floor. I grabbed my phone and recorded it, the sound chillingly clear in the playback. I didn't sleep, sitting on the couch with every light on the bat across my lap. The next day, the landlord called. They'd reviewed the footage and caught someone entering 5B multiple times, always late at night. The cameras didn't get a shot of their face, just a tall, thin figure in a hooded coat slipping through the unlocked door. The landlord had changed the locks and increased security, but they wouldn't tell me who or why they were targeting my apartment. The knocking and scratching stopped after that, and 5B's door stayed closed, but their relief didn't last a week. Later, I found something's lipped under my door, a torn piece of paper with a single word scrolled in jagged handwriting. Listen, that night, I heard it again. Not knocking or scratching, but footsteps, slow and heavy pacing inside 5B. The apartment was supposed to be empty, but the sound was unmistakable, circling the room, pausing by the shared wall. I pressed my ear against it, holding my breath, and heard a faint, wet gurgle like someone trying to speak through a throat full of liquid. He moved out the next month, breaking my lease and crashing with a friend. The landlord didn't fight me on it, which only made me more uneasy. Before I left, I asked Harold about 5B's last tenant. They hesitated, then said, "They found him in there, dead, hung himself, and the closed cops said he'd been there a while." He wouldn't say more, but his eyes told me he knew something he wasn't sharing. I still have their recording of the scratching. Sometimes late at night, I play it, and is where I can hear something else in the background, a voice, faint and distorted, whispering my name, the whispering shadows. It was the summer of 1995, and I was 12 years old, sprawled out on my bedroom floor in our new suburban home in upstate New York. We'd moved in just a week ago, trading the cramped chaos of our old apartment for a two-story house with a wraparound porch and a backyard that seemed to stretch into forever. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, a grid of neatly trimmed lawns and cookie-cutter homes, each with glowing porch lights that flickered like watchful eyes. My parents were thrilled about the upgrade, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was off that night. I was up way past midnight, sketching in my notebook under the dim glow of a desk lamp. My parents and little brother were fast asleep. The house is silent, except for the occasional creak of settling wood. He'd always been a night owl, finding comfort in the stillness when everyone else was out cold. My window was cracked open, letting in a cool breeze that carried the faint scent of pine from the woods beyond our street. Around 1, my herded tallow rhythmic come like engines spurring in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor coming home late, but the sound grew louder, more deliberate. Is at my pencil down window, peering through the blinds, 2 black vans, their headlights dimmed, crawled down our street, moving so slowly they seemed to glide. Mr. Mac twisted as they stopped directly in front of our house, their engine sidling with a soft, menacing growl. Ducked low, my heart pounding in my ears. From my vantage point, I could see front yard clearly, the porch swings swaying slightly in the breeze, the mail casting a long shadow under the streetlight. The van doors slide open with a faint, this sand. 6 figures stepped out. They were tall, dressed in dark jackets and hoods that obscured their faces in the moonlight. One of them carried a small metallic object that glinted briefly, and my mind raced with possibilities. A knife, a tool, something worse. 2 of the figures broke off, slipping silently toward the neighbor's house across the street. Their movements unnervingly synchronized. The other 4 headed straight for our front yard. I froze my breath, catching as their boots crunched on the gravel path leading to our porch. They stopped at the front door, and I heard the faint jingle of metal-like keys or tools being handled. Then a soft scraping sound. Someone was testing the door or knob. I pressed myself against the wall, my mind screaming to run to wake my parents, but my legs felt like the house was too quiet. Air too heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then all whisper, low gut, turl, almost inhuman, drifted through the open window. It wasn't words, note exactly, but a sound that made my skin crawl, like a voice trying to form something it couldn't quite manage. I don't know what possessed me, but I crept downstairs, avoiding the creaky steps, and crouched in the living room, hidden behind the couch. The front door loomed in the darkness, its frosted glass panel glowing faintly from the porch light outside. Through the glass I could see their silhouettes, 2 figures, unnaturally still, their heads tilted, as if listening. My eyes darted to the light switch by the door. If I could just, the whispering started again, louder this time, coming from all directions, seeping through the wall. It was like a chorus of voices, so overlapping, none of them human. My hands shook as I reached for the switch, every instinct screaming at me to stay hidden. There, I flipped the switch. The porch light blazed on, casting harsh shadows across the yard. The silhouettes flinched, and I heard a sharp intake of breath like a hiss before the sound of footsteps retreating as scrambled to the window, peering out just in time to see the four figures scurrying back to the vans across the street. The other two emerged from the neighbor's yard, moving with the same eerie precision, but something was wrong. One of them stopped, turning slowly to face our house. Even from a distance, I could feel their gaze, heavy and unnatural, boring into me through the glass. The van's engines roared to life, and they peeled away, their taillights vanishing into the night. But the whispering didn't stop. It lingered, faint but persistent, curling around the edges of my mind like smoke stayed by the window, clutching the curtain, watching the empty street until the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon. The vans never returned, but the whispering came back the next night, and the night after that, always just beyond the walls. When it told my parents the next morning, they brushed it off as a bad dream, blaming my overactive imagination and late-night sketching. But I knew what I had seen, what I'd heard a few days later. I noticed something else, small, strange marks etched into the wood of our porch like symbols. I couldn't decipher. The neighbor across the street moved out a week later, their house left dark and empty, the for sale signs weighing in the wind. I never found out who those figures were or what they wanted. But I started sleeping with my window closed, my desk lamp on, and a baseball bat by my bed. Some nights when the house is too quiet, I still heart that whispering, faint and far away, like it's waiting for me to listen just a little closer. The unseen visitor. It was the fall of 2002, and I was 25, fresh out of a dead-end job and starting over in a new city. I just moved into a sleek modern condo in downtown Chicago with a roommate. I barely knew a guy named Ethan. I'd met through a mutual friend. The condo was a steel high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view of the city skyline that made the rent feel worth it. My last place had been a crumbling walk-up with a shared bathroom and neighbors who screamed at each other through thin walls. So this felt like a palace. Ethan was a quiet guy, a graphic designer who kept to himself but seemed decent enough. We weren't friends, but we got along fine. About a month after moving, and something happened that I still can't fully explain. It was a chilly Saturday evening, and I'd spent the day unpacking the last of my box. Ethan had been home earlier, tinkering with his computer in the living room around D6. He poked his head into the kitchen where I was making a sandwich and said he was heading out to grab some art supplies and dinner. Need anything? He asked, already halfway out the door. I shook my head and he was gone, the front door clicking shut behind. I finished eating and headed to my bedroom, which was down a short hallway past the living room. One of the perks of this place was that each bedroom had its own ensuite bathroom, a luxury I wasn't used to, out of habit from my old place where privacy was non-existent. I always locked my bedroom door when I was inside. He kicked off my shoes, put on some music through my headphones, and started organizing my desk, losing track of time. Maybe 50 minutes later, I heard a faint rattle like someone testing the doorknob to me room. I froze, pulling off my headphones. The music had masked any other sounds, but now the condo was dead silent. The rattle came again, sharper this time, followed by a soft thud like a shoulder brushing against the door. My heart kicked into overdrive. I figured it was Ethan back from the store and maybe needing something, but it didn't sit right. He'd never tried to enter my room before, and why wouldn't a knock or say something? I stood the rest staring at the locked door, waiting for a voice. A knock, anything, nothing came, just silence, thick and oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Then something new. Our scraping sound like nails dragging across the wood of the door. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, and it sent a chill down my spine. I grabbed my phone and texted Ethan, "You back already?" No response awaited, my eyes glued to the door, half expecting the knob to turn again. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Ethan's reply, "Still at the shop, be back in 20. My stomach dropped. If Ethan was still out, who the hell was at my door? I backed away, my mind racing. The condo was on the 12th floor. Sanoon could have climbed in through a window. The front door had a deadbolt, but I hadn't it open or closes since Ethan left. I strained to listen, and that's when I heard it, a faint uneven shuffle like footsteps, moving away from my door, heading down the hallway toward the living room. The sound was wrong, though it wasn't the steady tread of shoes, but something softer, irregular, like bare feet dragging across the hardwood. I don't know why. I did it, maybe adrenaline, maybe stupidity. But I unlocked my door and cracked it open just enough to peek out. The hallway was dark, the living room beyond, it lit only by the faint glow of city lights through the windows. Nothing moved, but the air felt thiavy like the moment before a storm. Then from the living room came a sound I'll never forget, a loud rasping breath like air being forced through something. That wasn't quite human as Lamb made the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly. I dropped my phone. I dialed Ethan, whispering frantically about the noises, the doorknob. The breathing. He sounded confused, but said he'd forgotten to lock the front door when he left a habit from his old place where he'd never needed to stay in your room, he said. I wedged a chair under the doorknob and sat on the bed, clutching a baseball bat I kept under the mattress. The condo wasn't again, but it wasn't a comforting silence. It felt like something was waiting, listening. Then faintly, I heard the front door creak open and close, followed by a soft click. The deadbolt locking. My first thought was relief, assuming Ethan was back, but didn't call out. There weren't no footsteps, no sounds or bags being set down, just that same heavy silence. When Ethan finally got home about 10 minutes later, I heard him clearly, keys jangling, shoes on the floor, his voice calling my name. I opened my door, bat still in hand, and found him in the living room, looking pale. As I told him what happened, we searched every inch of the condo, closed its bathrooms, even the tinny balcony. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place, and noon was there. But as we checked the front door, I noticed something strange, a faint smudged handprint on the inside of the glass, too small long to either of us. We never found out who or what was in the condo that night, then swore he'd never forget to lock the door again. And I started double-checking it myself, but some nights when I'm alone in my room, I heard that scraping sound again, faint and fleeting, like something testing the edges of the door. And every so often, when the condo is too quiet, I catch a whiff of something unfamiliar in the air, sharp, metallic like blood.